I grew up in a small town in Southern California called San Marcos, and ever since I was a kid in the late 70s, I'd heard strange rumors about places called Elfin Forest, Harmony Grove, and Questhaven. The first time I remember hearing them was at a small park and playground tucked into Elfin Forest. A friend's mom took us there, and he told me a story about a couple who parked their car and fell asleep. When the woman woke up, she heard a tapping on the roof, only to discover her boyfriend had been hung from a tree above the car. This is one of the many stories told about this area. When I was told that initial story, it was the late 70s, and I now wonder where my friend heard this story. Over the years, the stories shifted and multiplied. Some people talked about murders at an abandoned mental hospital. Others claimed there was a cult hidden in the hills. By the time I was in high school, Elfin Forest and Questhaven had become late-night hangout spots, places where people parked, drank beer, and scared each other with rumors. I never saw anything myself, but I heard plenty, especially about kids sneaking out to the Questhaven retreat and daring one another to run up and rattle the gate before a security guard could shine a light or chase them off. One night, my friends and I drove out there and parked in an old Chevy Nova, drinking beer and killing time. Eventually, we decided to leave, and while doing a Y-turn, the driver hit the brakes. The red glow suddenly illuminated a horse standing right behind the car. Apparently, its stall or watering spot was nearby. When we turned around, all we could see through the back window was this glowing red horse staring straight into our souls. It was terrifying for a moment, but really the horse was just curious, lit up eerily by the brake lights. Other friends claimed to see apparitions drifting through the trees, and of course, there were endless stories about the White Witch. There always seems to be a White Witch. Eventually, I stopped thinking about it, until years later, when my kids and I started hiking different areas around San Diego, and the Elfin Forest recreation area came back onto the radar. We drove out there, and I felt compelled to see whether the old retreat was still standing. It was. Seeing it in broad daylight stripped away most of the fear I'd carried with me for years. Later, while I was in school, I wrote a paper on the Questhaven retreat and reached out to the coordinator, who invited me to visit. I declined due to time constraints, but I did spend time on their website reading about their history and beliefs. The site is thorough and transparent, and I watched several recordings of their services. It reminded me of the Christian church I attended in the early 1980s. I'm not particularly religious, but the message felt practical and grounded. Questhaven is non-denominational, open about its mission, and leans toward the mystical rather than the dogmatic. When I was younger, this area was entirely rural. Once you turned off the main road, a single lane led to a dirt road shaded by oak trees. I drove out there a few days ago, and now the surrounding area is completely suburban. Really nice neighborhoods, too. Then, almost without warning, the road narrows back down to a single lane, and the landscape immediately turns rural again. I parked in front of the main gate of the Questhaven retreat, and across the cul-de-sac, there was a trailhead. I followed the trail down into a small valley lined with oak and eucalyptus trees. Along the way, I passed a man walking toward me, listening to a sermon on his phone. We nodded and said hello as we passed. When I eventually turned back, I ran into him again at the trailhead, and we stopped to talk for a moment about what a beautiful day it was. The retreat was founded in 1940 by Reverends Florence and Lawrence Newhouse. Florence Newhouse was already a well-known Christian mystic by the early 1930s, authoring books and speaking throughout California. She and Lawrence married in 1933, and 7 years later purchased property in northern San Diego County to establish the retreat. As far as I know, you can attend services on Sundays and even rent a cabin if you want to stay on the grounds. Questhaven isn't the only spiritual group tied to the area. Nearby is the Harmony Grove Spiritualist Association, incorporated in 1896. Harmony Grove approached spiritualism not just as a religion, but as a philosophy and a kind of science. At one point, it was a full community with homes, ministers, healers, psychics, mediums, teachers, and students. While I'm not sure how many residences remain, the organization is still active and maintains its main building. Then there's the story of the mental hospital, supposedly hidden in the forest, supposedly burned down, and supposedly the source of all the ghosts. I've heard every version imaginable, that it was part of the retreat, that it existed independently, or that it never existed at all. I honestly don't know what to believe. What I do know is that the rumors about this area have persisted for generations. Almost anyone who grew up in San Marcos can tell you stories about driving out to Elfin Forest on Halloween night. My sense is that kids don't really do that anymore. These days, the stories mostly live on through their parents. If you search for Elfin Forest or Questhaven online, you'll find a lot of misinformation and plenty of videos designed to scare you. If you ever decide to visit any of these areas, keep in mind that much of the land is private property, and it's safe to assume the people who live there value their privacy. Questhaven in particular is exactly what it claims to be, just a retreat. If you plan to visit, be respectful, or if you're thinking about going onto the grounds, call ahead.